They said I wasn't cut out to lead a squad, let alone fly one. I was the girl who froze during drills, failed a simulation once, and cried at my sister's graduation when they skipped my name. I was the emotional one, the backup daughter, the one who'd never wear the uniform right. So when my sister got into the elite air tactical division, the family cheered like she was the only legacy that mattered. No one noticed I had quietly entered a program with even higher clearance. No one asked. When I shipped out for my first overseas command mission, I did it in silence. My mom was too busy planning a party for my sister's deployment. My dad said, "Let's not make a big deal, in case it doesn't work out." That hurt more than any training injury I ever had. But I swallowed it, like I always did. Funny thing about flying high, you see everything clearly, even the people who tried to ground you. So when her crewmate looked at me across the tarmac and said, "Ma'am, you're the captain?" I didn't flinch. I just saluted and walked past. They thought I disappeared, but they had no idea what kind of mission I was about to fly into. My name is Harper Quinn. This story isn't just about rank, it's about silence, survival, and how sometimes the ones left behind are the ones flying highest. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say "listening" in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. And if any part of this touches you, I'd be honored if you followed this channel. Because stories like mine, they're not just mine, they're ours. Thank you. And now, here's my story. Most mornings, I woke up to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt water sneaking through the cracked window of my small house near Queen's Haven Harbor. The place wasn't much, peeling white paint, rusted hinges, but it was mine. After everything that had happened, after everything I left behind, quiet had become a kind of survival. My days were simple: oatmeal at 6, coffee black, and then the dock by 7 sharp. That's when the kids arrived. They came in slow, hesitant waves. Boys with too much anger, girls with eyes too old for their faces. Part of a rehabilitation program for youth offenders, they didn't care about learning to row. Not at first, but I wasn't there to coddle them. I gave them orders like I used to on deck, sharp and unflinching. And slowly, silently, they started to listen. None of them knew I had once commanded rescue missions in waters too cold to breathe. None of them knew about the storm in the North Pacific, the capsized vessel, the 19-year-old private who never resurfaced. They didn't know that after that night, I folded my uniform and walked out of the Navy for good. That I'd been labeled emotionally unfit, whispered about like a broken compass no longer trusted to lead. So when my sister Sienna invited me to her celebratory dinner, I hesitated. "Just a small thing," she had said. "The Sea Rise contract came through. I'm head chef now." Her voice was sweet, but laced with that edge she always carried. Like a butter knife you only realized was cutting once it was too late. Against my better judgment, I said yes. Maybe it was time. Maybe I owed it to myself to be seen, even if just for one night. The house was blinding when I arrived. Glass chandeliers, polished floors, laughter spilling like champagne from room to room. I stepped inside, instantly aware of how my worn boots squeaked on the marble. Sienna greeted me with a hug that barely touched. Her designer dress shimmered like oil on water. "Rowan!" she beamed, turning to the crowd. "She teaches rowing to juvenile delinquents. Not sure if she's a counselor or a warden." Laughter erupted. Real, full-throated laughter. Even my parents chuckled. My mother clinked her wineglass. My father raised an eyebrow but said nothing. No one mentioned my service. No one spoke of the years I spent charting danger and rescue through open seas. I stood there, a ghost in boots, while they laughed. Then, as the clinking of forks softened and the talk shifted, Sienna leaned over with a glint in her eyes. "You should come with us," she said, swirling her wine. "We're sailing the Sea Rise next week, first launch. Be nice to have you on board. For old time's sake." I smiled, but something inside me bristled. It wasn't an invitation, it was a gesture, a performance, like she was tossing me a life ring in front of her friends. I nodded anyway. I didn't care about her stage. I just wanted to feel the ocean again, even if it meant boarding a ship that didn't belong to me. The night waned. People trickled out with kisses and wine breath. As I was leaving, my father passed me by the door. He paused, looked at me, really looked, and muttered, "The sea needs a captain. But once you lose yourself, don't expect it to follow your orders again." I didn't answer, just watched him walk away, my throat tight. My eyes drifted to the newly hung family photo in the hallway. Everyone was smiling. I stood in uniform in the corner, proud and still. But in this version, someone had reframed it, cropped out the insignia on my shoulder. All that remained was a partial shadow, half a sleeve, and a silence too loud to ignore. Exactly 1 week after the dinner, I stepped onto the Sea Rise. It was early morning, the air still tasting of brine, with a pale fog draped across the harbor like a curtain waiting to be drawn. My boots met the deck with a familiar thud, but the sensation was foreign. This wasn't my ship. I wasn't crew. I was family. A guest tagging along under Sienna's generous invitation for the 4-day pre-launch voyage. Still, I brought only one small pack, my hand steady, though my chest felt tight. I hadn't been on the water like this in years. The ocean welcomed and unsettled me in equal measure. The Sea Rise gleamed. Glass-paneled railings, polished wood, marble-topped bars on the upper decks. But beneath all the sparkle, there was a stillness that felt sterile, like a showroom boat, rather than a vessel meant to carry people through shifting tides. I could feel it in the way the walls hummed, not with life, but with performance. They assigned me a room 2 decks below, tucked beside the kitchen storage and just above the machinery. Sienna claimed all the upper cabins were full, media people, influencers, clients. Down here, everything smelled like metal and disinfectant. There were no portholes, only the dull buzz of lights that never dimmed. I unpacked in silence. It didn't take long to notice the crew. Young, mostly. Energetic. Overly polite. But their movements were uncertain, their grip on protocol loose. A few whispered to each other in corners. When one of the young deckhands fumbled with the rigging line, I instinctively stepped in to correct the knot. He blinked at me, wide-eyed. "Sorry, ma'am," he muttered, and backed away like I'd scared him. Later that day, while stretching my legs near the engine room, I met Leo. Mid-30s, rough hands, oil-stained uniform. He looked like someone who'd actually worked a ship. He raised an eyebrow as I checked the fire extinguisher latch without thinking. "Military?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. He nodded with quiet respect. "Thought so. Nobody checks that thing unless they've seen something go wrong." It should have been a normal exchange, but everything felt just slightly off. The emergency compass near the helm was missing its casing. I passed the radio station in the navigation bay. It was dark. I tried the panel. Dead. No explanation. The lock on the nav room had been replaced. New keypad. When I asked one of the stewards why the backup systems were inactive, he shrugged and said, "It's just a soft launch. Everything's automated anyway." That didn't sit right. Then came the route map. It was tucked under a clipboard in the lounge, just visible enough to catch my eye. I recognized the coordinates instantly. Instead of hugging the Oregon coastline as announced, the ship was charting a hard curve out toward deeper waters, nearing commercial lanes. Riskier, more volatile. I brought it to Sienna. She barely blinked. People pay for adventure, Rowan. If we cruise the shore, they'll say it's boring. And if a storm rolls in? I asked. She smiled, sipping from her cocktail. That's what insurance is for. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bunk staring at the steel ceiling, listening to the low groan of the ship shifting against the tide. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. Sharp. Precise. Echoing through the wall like a warning from inside the hull. I got up, pulled on my boots, and stepped into the narrow corridor. No one. Just the hum of the vents and the faint sound of water. I turned the corner, and there was Leo, hands in his pockets, watching me. You heard it too? I asked. He nodded slowly. I did. And it's not the first time. We stood in silence. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. I served on a Navy training ship for 6 years. This one? It's dressed like a yacht, but the framework, it's not civilian grade. Someone rebuilt this vessel for something else. The sky was still painted in strokes of indigo when I stepped onto the main deck. The sea rise sliced through the early morning mist, and for a moment, the silence felt pure. But as I watched Colby fumble with the digital chart panel near the helm, the calm curdled into something else. He was muttering to himself, jabbing at the screen like it had personally offended him. A man in a crisp white jacket with gold trim and sunglasses before sunrise. He looked more like a yacht model than a captain. He didn't notice me until I shifted my weight and the deck creaked. Well, he said, flashing a grin too white to be real. Morning, chef's sister. Lost or just sightseeing? I said nothing. Didn't peg you for a morning person, he added, tapping at the console again. You military types like rules, huh? Probably waiting for a bell to ring or a flag to salute. His voice grated like sand in a wound. I glanced over his shoulder. He had the GPS interface zoomed in too close, losing broader bearings. Amateurs always thought detail meant control. I turned without a word. Behind me, I heard him mutter, "No sense of humor. Figures." I found Sienna later by the buffet counter, arranging a line of amuse-bouches like she was curating a museum exhibit. She looked tired but determined. When I mentioned Colby, her smile tightened. He's not that bad, she said, eyes darting. Anyway, the company loves him. Says he has a good following. Instagram likes don't steady a ship. Rowan, don't. Just let me handle my side of this. That was her way. Apologizing without saying sorry, retreating behind polite deflections. I let it go, but something in me stayed knotted all morning. Later that day, I found myself leaning against the railing, the salt wind catching the edge of my sleeve. My thoughts drifted. Not just to the ship, but to the last time I'd truly captained anything. 2012. Pacific Command. Evacuation run off the coast of Manila after a tropical cyclone disrupted communication towers. Orders came down wrong. Urgency overruled safety. I'd protested. Got shut down. Haskins, a 19-year-old radio man, was swept off deck during the night shift. No tether. No chance. I still saw his boots in my dreams. They told me to keep quiet. For morale. For the mission. For the bigger picture. I buried the truth so deep it fused into silence. I left the service with a citation and a shadow I couldn't shake. By mid-afternoon, Leo found me in the lower corridor, holding a coffee that looked too old to trust. I got something, he said, and handed me a small, scratched GPS tracker. I hooked it to the vent rail below the engine housing, checked the feed against a nautical chart I had stored. He paused. We're 39.7 nautical miles off course. I stared at him. He nodded toward the bridge. Colby's changing course. Slowly. Not enough for anyone to notice day to day, but we're moving into deeper zones. International traffic lanes, military patterns. I think he's testing something, but it's not just him. What do you mean? I think someone else is running part of this ship, he said. He's in charge, yeah, but there's stuff he doesn't know, or isn't supposed to. I tucked the tracker into my jacket, chest tightening. That evening, I climbed the stairs again to the radio room. The equipment was silent, the wall map freshly pinned, hiding the scars underneath. I don't know why I pulled it down, instinct maybe, but the moment I did, I saw it. Carved roughly into the wall beneath the tattered insulation backing, letters shaky and jagged like they were scratched by someone in the dark. This ship never came back. 2017. I stepped back. The floor felt like it tilted slightly beneath me. The Sea Rise wasn't a new ship. It was rebuilt, repurposed. But the bones were old, military old, and something had happened to it once before. Something no one had ever talked about. By the third day aboard the Sea Rise, the ocean was still as glass, but inside me, the storm wouldn't quiet. Everything looked pristine, shimmering decks, folded towels, gentle laughter floating from the brunch buffet. But beneath it all, I felt the pressure building, like the ship itself was holding its breath. And I wasn't the only one. Leo found me mid-morning near the crew galley. His voice was low, face tight. "The auxiliary radar system's been disabled," he said. "From the third-level engineering bay. That's a command code-only zone. I shouldn't even have access logs, but I spoofed an old maintenance credential." I felt my stomach twist. So someone with command-level clearance doesn't want us seeing what's ahead. Or behind, he added, eyes darkening. I barely had time to process it before a commotion broke out 2 decks up. A woman, one of the guests, early 60s, quiet, solo traveler, had been found screaming near Corridor C. She claimed she'd seen a man in a faded naval uniform standing at the junction near the service stairwell. According to a steward, he just vanished. Minutes later, she was escorted away, sedated by the ship's nurse. Official line: stress, dehydration, altitude confusion. I didn't believe it. Not after what I'd seen on that wall. Not with the way this ship kept swallowing the truth. Later that afternoon, while inspecting the lifeboat stations out of sheer habit, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The release mechanisms had been sealed. Not just locked, but secured with newly crimped steel cable. Fresh. Clean. Like someone had deliberately ensured no one could leave in a hurry. Or at all. I found Colby in the upper lounge, half draped on a leather armchair like a magazine spread. "Explain the heading," I demanded. "We're nowhere near the original path. The lifeboats are rigged. The radar's down. What exactly are you doing out here?" He smiled lazily, swirling a glass of something amber. "Rowan, right? You're thinking like a sailor. But I'm not a navigator. I'm a curator. Of experiences." He gestured toward the horizon. "You see blue and think distance. I see a canvas. I'm painting." I stared at him, the urge to throw him overboard rising fast. "I'm not bound by maps," he added, voice honeyed. "Maps limit what people expect. I deliver what they remember." That night, Leo returned with something worse than bad news: evidence. "I found this in an old cabinet in the engine room. I think it belonged to the former chief engineer." He handed me a manila folder. Inside was a copy of a ship registry for something called Magellan Echo. Same hull number, same specs. It had vanished during a classified maritime trial in 2017, a military experiment, never acknowledged officially. 3 personnel declared missing. No remains found. The ship was quietly stricken from naval records. Then, years later, reborn as a luxury experience. No one told the guests they were sailing a ghost. Still shaken, I made my way down to the auxiliary electrical storage, an old part of the ship no one used now. The air smelled of dust and salt. That's when I found it. A half-burnt server stack tucked behind crates. One drive still had a flicker of life. I plugged it into an old screen and braced myself. The footage was grainy, black and white. Night vision static danced across the screen. The camera was set high, probably from the bridge. At 3:12 a.m., movement. A figure. No, two. Dragging something. No. Someone. The third figure struggled, limp but conscious. Their mouth moved, slow and deliberate. I leaned in. They know. There was no sound, just those words over and over. Then static. I stared until the screen blinked out. Later, I stood at the bridge window, watching the dying sun smear the water orange. My gaze caught on something. An anchor, the backup one, still secured to its housing. On a ship headed for long-range travel, that anchor should have been deployed already. I understood then. We weren't just drifting off course. We were being erased. That night, the ocean turned restless. No warning from the radar, no updates from the bridge. But the deck shifted underfoot like the sea had grown teeth. Guests were murmuring, clinging to rails as the ship pitched against invisible forces. Then the lights began to fade. First the walkway strobes, then the emergency beacons. Panic flickered like static across the decks. Meanwhile, Colby was locked in the VIP lounge, streaming himself under golden sconces, grinning to thousands of viewers about a spontaneous storm, a twist in the tale. He called it entertainment. I called it sabotage. I had to act. With Leo's help, I bypassed the biometric lock on the comms chamber. It took us 32 minutes and a hairpin. Inside, banks of screens buzzed and hummed, most displaying blank grids. But one panel still held archived satellite feed. The data wasn't scrambled. It had simply been rerouted. When I pulled up our coordinates, my stomach dropped. We weren't just off course. We were headed into an old naval test zone, decommissioned for acoustic anomalies. A place struck from maps because the sound itself could sink metal. They'd sailed us into a dead zone on purpose. Later that night, as I was climbing up a narrow access stairwell near the old antenna housing, a voice stopped me. "Captain?" I turned. It was a woman in a regulation sidearm holster, Maris, one of Colby's junior officers. "You don't remember me," she said, almost smiling. "But I know who you are. Rowan Vale, Naval Commander, Pacific Division. Your photo was on the wall at Academy Southgate, until it wasn't. They said not to ask, but I asked, and I found the video. The one from 2017. I felt like my ribs cracked open." She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "You weren't the one who failed. That's why they buried you. That's why they tried to erase you." I nodded slowly. "Then help me take this ship back." By midnight, I had a team. Leo, of course. Maris, who had her own access codes, and a passenger named Daryl Green, retired merchant captain with more sea hours than all of us combined. We started mapping weak points, blind spots, analog systems that hadn't been digitized. We kept our meetings in the cold storage bay, where the Wi-Fi couldn't reach, and the walls were too thick to bug. But it wasn't long before Colby noticed the shifts in the system. We triggered a backup sensor by accident while checking hull pressure. Within the hour, lockdown protocols snapped into place. Gates sealed between crew and passenger quarters. Stairwells were blocked. The ship was no longer a vessel. It was a prison. That's when Colby confronted me. I was moving through Corridor F when the lights cut. His voice emerged from the shadows first. "Funny thing about legacy," he said. "It dies when no one speaks it." He stepped forward. No smile now. "You're the past I erased. You're the name I scrubbed from the records. But sure, try and play hero. Let's see who the waves remember." He reached for the wall panel, but I bolted. I slipped through a maintenance shaft, slid down 2 decks, and locked myself inside the old radar observation room. A place no longer used. Officially. That's when I saw it. A leather-bound logbook, dust-coated, wedged behind a rusted radio. I opened it with trembling fingers. The pages were stiff, water-stained, and full of looping, firm handwriting, naval entries, daily logs, a ship's slow spiral into silence. The last signature stopped me cold. Captain Elias Vale, my father. The man the Navy claimed vanished without trace in 2017. This ship, Sea Rise, hadn't just stolen my name, it had stolen my blood. I flipped to the final page. The ink was gone, but something had been carved. Deep, deliberate, like the hand had bled making it. If you found this, don't trust anyone holding the map. The stale air inside the old radar chamber was thick, metallic, and strangely warm. I sat on the floor, my hands stiff, my mind racing. My father's words, scratched into the logbook like a final warning, rattled in my skull. Don't trust anyone holding the map. And yet, the map was all I had left, except maybe the memory of how this ship was first designed. I reached for the emergency knife tucked inside the medkit stitched into the wall. The handle was cold and familiar. Carefully, I began prying loose the paneling behind the old radar array. If my memory of the original engineering schematics was still accurate, there was supposed to be a maintenance conduit that ran under the paneling, connecting this chamber to System Room 3, an access corridor that had never made it to the final blueprint. Every screw I removed felt like a small act of rebellion. 22 minutes later, I crawled through the narrow, dust-choked gap, scraping my elbows raw until my boots landed on the metal grating of a forgotten corridor. It smelled like salt and rust. At the end of the passage, the door to System Room 3 hung open. Inside, Leo stood with a power cell in his hands, half his face illuminated by the weak blue glow of emergency backup. "You really don't like using doors, do you?" he muttered, eyes wide with relief. "I prefer shortcuts," I said, though my breath was ragged. He handed me a canteen, and I nearly spat the water out. It tasted wrong. Maris appeared moments later through another passage and didn't waste time. "The filtration system's been tampered with. Reverse valved at the intake. Passengers are already feeling it. Mild sodium poisoning, headaches, dizziness. Someone did this on purpose." Leo cursed under his breath. We worked fast to connect the portable power cell to a dormant interface terminal. Once the screen flickered to life, I navigated to the hidden satellite logs we'd salvaged earlier. One ping stood out, a repeating echo, barely noticeable unless you were trained to look. An anonymous signal had been transmitting from the Sea Rise on loop for the past 7 years. And just recently, it had started replying to something. The coordinates it connected to? An area 5 nautical miles away, marked as open sea on every naval database. But this signal had depth. It came with an acoustic fingerprint. Low, pulsing, layered like sonar. Something was out there. Then we found the black box. Buried under a storage crate in the far corner of the system room, the unit was older than the Sea Rise's current refit. Leo managed to extract the audio data. Half-corrupted, full of skips and whines. But one part was clear. It was a man's voice, broken, gasping through interference. "Colby, I knew you'd come back, not with my daughter." I staggered back, the sound slicing through my chest. That voice wasn't just familiar, it was blood. My father had known. He'd seen Colby coming before the end. He hadn't just disappeared. He'd been betrayed. Maris was quiet for a moment before she pulled out a hand-drawn schematic, what she'd managed to sketch from memory after a month of navigating the hidden decks. One room, on sub-level 4, had been welded shut. No designation, no number. But the coordinates lined up exactly with the old auxiliary command center, my father's last assigned station. A room the refit claimed had been decommissioned and stripped. But it hadn't been removed. It had been sealed. "That's where he was," I said. My voice felt too small for the weight it carried. No one spoke. Leo put a hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't feel it. I stared at that section of the diagram. It all made sense now. Sea rise wasn't just drifting. It was a grave sailing toward silence, carrying ghosts with unfinished business. This was never just about a hijacked ship. It was a cover-up wrapped in waves. A history scrubbed clean and now, finally, breaking through the surface. I looked at Maris. Her eyes reflected nothing but resolve. "We're not just saving the ship," I whispered. "We're unearthing a buried crime, Colby's and the entire system that let him rise again." The metal groaned like a sleeping beast as our blowtorches cut through the sealed door on subdeck 4. Sparks flared, dancing off rusted hinges and scorched paint. For a moment, I hesitated. Beyond this threshold lay answers, maybe even bodies. But I'd come too far to freeze now. With a final hiss of heated steel, the door swung open, revealing a room trapped in time. Dust hung thick in the air, coating every surface like ancient ash. Broken monitors, disconnected consoles, and a single CRT screen blinked slowly, casting a soft orange hue across the gloom like a dying heartbeat. We stepped inside. Leo scanned the room first, flashlight in hand. I moved toward a stack of rusted lockers and found a metal container buried beneath a thermal blanket. Inside were several encrypted data chips marked 2017, military format. My fingers trembled slightly as I handed one to Leo. He knelt beside the console, his brow furrowed as the code spilled across the screen. After a few minutes and some choice words, the encryption broke. The logs weren't just test runs. They were records from the original Magellan Echo voyage, the voyage that never existed on paper. There, buried in redacted files, was a single directive: override all rescue protocols, immediate operational lockdown. Signed by Colby Fenwick, then listed as route coordinator. My breath caught. He hadn't just watched it happen. He'd ordered the silence. As I stood processing it all, my gaze caught something behind the glass panel of an old bulkhead. I wiped away the grime. It was a photograph. Faded, but unmistakable. A man of Asian descent, broad-shouldered and gentle-eyed, stood beside a teenage girl. Me, 13. That was the man I called my father. But a storm was brewing behind that image, something I could feel but not yet name. Then Maris called out. She pointed to a smear of dark red on the wall, fresh enough to make us pause. She reached toward a crack between panels and pulled out a torn sleeve. Navy uniform. Stained. The stitching read, "B. Arkham." My heart stopped. That name was on the list. Missing crew from Magellan's first journey. Before we could make sense of it, the lights flickered. Footsteps. 2 technicians burst in, armed and shouting. But they weren't from the current crew. Their boots, their movement, it was military. Leo shouted as we were shoved against the wall. No questions, no chance to resist. They herded us down a back corridor and locked us in what I recognized too late: the cryo hold. Once a morgue during the ship's prototype days. The air was freezing and thin. The lights were dim blue. Maris cursed under her breath, pacing the rows of empty storage units. I searched the walls for a weak point, anything. That's when I saw it. A door. Small. Bolted from the outside. I yanked at it. Nothing. Leo brought over a crowbar from a toolkit. It took minutes. We cracked it open just enough to peer inside. A man lay slumped against the wall. His hair was silver, beard matted, eyes shut like he hadn't opened them in years. Maris gasped, stepping back as if struck. Oh my God, that's Captain Ethan Rowe. He was supposed to have died. With my father. I stepped inside the tiny chamber, heart racing, reaching down to touch his hand. Cold. So cold I wanted to pull back. But then his eyes fluttered open. Kon, he whispered. But your eyes, they're Raymond Cole's. The world tilted. The man I thought was my father, he wasn't. I stumbled back, my brain tearing through every memory, every lie, every quiet assumption. If Raymond wasn't my biological father, then who was I? Why had I been brought back here? What part did I play in the story of the sea rise? And who, really, had been steering it all along? The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and salt. I sat on a folding cot, staring at the man across from me, the man whose name was Ethan Rowe, the real captain, the ghost. Leo adjusted the signal uplink module beside us while Maris secured the hatch. The door thumped once, just the old hull flexing, we told ourselves, but we knew Colby's clock was ticking. If he didn't already know we were alive, he would soon. Rowe's voice was rough, as if unused for years, but every word burned with clarity. In 2017, Magellan Echo was testing a new classified route. They called it Siren Protocol, funded by a joint military-industrial advisory board. Your father, Raymond, was the systems engineer, and the only one who opposed it. He tried to send an alert. Colby found out. He locked the control room and cut the oxygen supply. I felt the floor drop beneath me. He killed my father to protect a lie. Then he renamed the ship, rebranded the mission, rewrote history, and left me as the lone survivor so he could clean the slate. Rowe nodded, painfully slow. Leo broke the silence. Satellite relay is online. We've got partial access. Enough to push a signal. My hands moved without thinking. I entered the old system code, the one registered under Raymond Cole's ID. Emergency Echo Class 1. A distress signal so severe it would trigger immediate naval response across any jurisdiction. A beacon of truth, screaming through the layers of lies. Except it didn't go through. Transmission blocked. Override order confirmed. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The override wasn't from the ship. Colby had someone inside the department. Someone powerful enough to silence an echo signal. Before we could react, the intercom cracked to life. Colby's voice filled the bay, low and smooth like oil over water. Rowan, you really do look like him. But your father? He wasn't a saint. Are you sure you're not just chasing a fantasy? A myth you built to make sense of the chaos? Then silence. Then blackness. The lights died. The panels shut off. The sea rise slipped into silent override. We were in the dark again, but not alone. Maris reached for her weapon. Leo checked his battery. I stared into the dark and whispered, "We're not waiting for backup. We're taking the helm, the way my father tried to, the way I will now." From my coat, I pulled the old mechanical key I'd found hidden in the room beneath the deck. Its teeth were strange, uneven. I slid it into the backup helm control. The ship rumbled, a low, guttural sound rising from its core. I looked through the reinforced glass at the ocean ahead, endless and black. If Colby wanted to bury the truth at sea, I said, then I'll drag it into the light, right here, on the deck he thought he ruled. Dawn broke with a silence that felt almost sacred. The sky blushed faint orange as the nightingale cut through the still waters, headed not for port, but toward a new vector, one that Rowan herself had set. The old systems had been locked, overwritten. I stood at the helm, my hands still stained with machine oil and a dried smear of blood along my temple. We had taken the ship back, but that wasn't the end. That was the beginning of what I needed to do next. In the tight quarters of the control deck, Leo handed me the makeshift transmitter, spliced together from parts pulled out of the ship's abandoned nav relay. We didn't have time for finesse. We needed the world to see what we found. For the next 15 minutes, I stared down the eye of the satellite camera and delivered a broadcast to the global maritime feed, streamed to every port authority and independent regulator from Alaska to Singapore. I laid it bare. The manipulated charts, the buried trials from 2017, the falsified command logs. I played the audio of my father's final warning, the one Colby tried to erase. I showed the schematics for the overridden cockpit, the altered fuel compression readings, and finally, a still of the fabricated emergency shutdown form. It bore a signature in looping juvenile script. Mine. But I was only 14. Colby had forged it to seal the lie. Just as I uploaded the last encrypted packet, Leo hissed, "We've got company." The ship's console flashed. Coastal Command lock. Identified target Rowan Cole. Warrant executed. Charge. Vessel hijack. Colby had moved first. The bastard knew I'd try to fight him, so he framed me, preemptively. Maris turned pale. Leo's hands trembled. But I didn't flinch. "Let him come," I whispered. He brought the world's attention to this ship. That was his first mistake. As we reached the coordinates I had transmitted 2 nights earlier, a gray ship shimmered into view on the horizon. It was the Veritas, a maritime oversight vessel under independent multinational jurisdiction. Leo had quietly shared our cash with their governing board while I handled the press. Their boarding crew arrived within minutes. No drama, no drawn weapons, just quiet precision as they moved through the corridors like ghosts. They found Colby on the upper deck. His face was gray, eyes narrowed, a single bead of sweat creeping down his temple. "You're to relinquish command of this vessel," the lead officer said. Colby smirked. "I built this stage. Every light, every prop. You think handing her the microphone makes her a hero? Truth doesn't save anyone. It isolates them." I stepped forward. "It's not truth that drowns people. It's silence." He didn't speak again. They took him in cuffs. The broadcast was still live. I walked back to the console, flicked on the mic, and looked directly into the lens. "My name is Rowan Cole. I am the daughter of the man whose voice you just heard. I am an engineer, a survivor. And now, after all of it, I'm the one commanding this ship." 3 months later, the Nightingale floated in quieter waters, both literally and metaphorically. She'd been reclassified, refurbished, and repurposed into a training vessel under the guidance of the International Maritime Alliance. In place of corrupted crew and profit-chasing executives were eager-eyed engineering students from 5 continents. They bunked where the old guards once schemed. They ran diagnostics on systems once buried under falsified logs. I sat in the captain's chair, the one that had once held Colby Fenwick, now reupholstered but bearing the same steel beneath. Beside me, a scorched photo in a thin frame. My father standing on the deck, eyes fierce, the sea wide behind him. I still didn't know everything about his past, but I knew what mattered. The courts had done their part. Colby and his cabal of silent partners were facing charges for criminal negligence, falsification, and obstruction. Poseidon Maritime had been carved apart, its assets redistributed. The Alliance took stewardship of the Nightingale, and me, the forgotten girl in the shadows, was now tasked with shaping the next generation. One of the programs we built from scratch was Project Iris, a new vessel blueprint designed by a global team of apprentices. We named it after my father's failsafe code, the iris beacon he once used to signal distress in a sea of lies. It became our symbol of integrity, of light in silence. They invited me to speak at the opening of the new Marine Leadership Institute in Oregon. Cameras, suits, flags. students barely older than I had been when my world split open. I stood at the podium, not to inspire but to warn. I won't tell you that courage feels good, it often doesn't. But don't let anyone else write your chart, not your bosses, not your fears. The ocean won't ask who you are. It'll just ask if you'll hold the wheel when the sky goes black. Applause was soft. I didn't mind. I hadn't come for a standing ovation. I'd come to be seen. As the crowd began to disperse, I caught sight of Maurice, leaning against the far wall, arms folded. She approached, silent as always, and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was the ship's original captain insignia, polished, refurbished. Underneath, engraved in new lettering, Captain Rowan a Cole. I hugged her. No words, just breath and sea salt and something unspoken, settling between us. That night, I walked alone on the deck. The wind was sharp, but it didn't bite. I reached into my coat and pulled out the cap. The same one Colby once hurled into the water, now recovered, stitched anew. I placed it on my head and pressed the startup on our navigation relay. A new voice crackled to life over the speaker. "Welcome aboard, Captain." I smiled. Far off, cutting through the mist, a new lighthouse cast its glow, built on the ruins of the old one my father had marked on every hidden map. Its light swept across the waves, across the deck, across my face. The sea never asked who I was. It only ever wanted to know. Would I steer steady? Would I keep going? Would I dare to rise? And my answer was yes. Sometimes the truth doesn't roar. It whispers through wreckage, through silence, through the weight of choices made in the dark. And in those quiet moments, we face not just the world, but ourselves. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the courage to remember, to rise, and to keep going. If this story moved something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories like this, hit subscribe. Your presence here means more than you know.